Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have a great show for you this evening, and we'll be talking about that in just a second. I want to thank everyone that supports the show. I do appreciate that, and that information's over at Podcast UFO. We also have a Patreon page you can check out too, and the shows you can actually access shows through Patreon through their RSS feed if you support the show, the full shows that is. So if you head over to podcastufo.com, we have, by a great demand, a new merchandise store. We just opened it up this morning. It's right there on the menu bar. We have T-shirts, pullovers, tank tops, hoodies, pillows, shower curtains even. And this was all with the wonderful graphic that Diane Cash made, I think 2 or 3 years ago for T-shirts. Actually, it was she won the first prize in the T-shirt graphics contest that I did. So it's a great graphics. It's basically a triangle, UFO, and a beautiful night sky. Looks almost like the Milky Way going through there. And then you see this triangle UFO, like I said, with a single person looking down, I think pointing up or something like that. Wonderful graphics. So check that out. Now, if you go into the show notes or under this show, whether it's on YouTube or on my website or even in your media player, you will see a link to where the merchandise store is. Also, there is a code that's good for 2 weeks, just in time for Christmas. I'm not going to say the code. It's too long. But the code is included also in the show notes and in the show itself text. So it's all right there. It's 20% off for 2 weeks. And the prices are very reasonable. It's not like these are expensive in any type of way. They're just regular T-shirt price that you see out there. I forgot to announce last week we had a blog called UFOs and Astronauts, very well written, very informational. And this week we have UFOs over Scotland. So if you are new to this whole topic, there's a great amount of information in these weekly blogs. So check that out again over at podcastufo.com. And I want to thank Charles Lear for doing a great job with those. Our repeat guest tonight, he's also a personal friend, and he's going to be joining us in just 1 minute here, Chris Lambright. Chris has worked extensively in computer technology and internet services and has a background in graphic arts, illustration, CGI, and holds a degree in psychology from Baylor University. He's a former investigator for the Center of UFO Studies and a contributor to the Computer UFO Network. And he's also a licensed private investigator. He likes to investigate things, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. He currently lives in Austin, Texas. What we're going to be talking about tonight is the U.S. Navy, its relation to UFOs, including the USS Nimitz UFO encounter, Bigelow Airspace, and the connection between the U.S. government and TTSA, all that good stuff. Chris has written a paper on this, and on my website you will see a PDF. Currently, there's the links in the PDF are not active. They will be by tomorrow. So maybe by the time most of the people are listening to the show, those links will be active, because he links, instead of doing like a summary with or footnotes. A lot of things that Chris is talking about is live links, so you can go right to those to reference them. Welcome to the show, Chris. Always good talking to you.
Hi, Martin. Nice to see you again. How are you?
Good, good. I've made a few friends along the way doing the show, and I consider you a good one. I can't remember the first time you were on.
I guess it goes way back.
It does.
Yeah, it was a
I
few
think
years
like
ago.
2012 or... I had heard you on Coast to Coast, I think back in 2012, and I contacted you. You were gracious enough to come on, and we've been basically in touch ever since. We talk on the phone a lot, and it's been good. And we have a mutual friend, Ray Stanford. Always interesting talking to him and the things that he has done. We're supporting him, and it's an amazing world that he's in, isn't it? I mean, what he's uncovered in the dinosaur world is just
Yeah, and I
unbelievable.
talked to him this morning, and he had a close call last week. It was almost all over. He told me about a car accident. Somebody ran a stop sign, took the front end of his car off with his wife in it, and
Oh my God.
pushed him up against a tree. It was close. It was
Oh,
a close one.
jeez.
But
No.
he's okay. It sounds like both of them. So,
Yeah. Well, that's good.
and
Wow.
they got a new
Didn't hear that.
car. So,
Yeah, they get a new car out of it. So, Chris,
yeah.
for the person, I kind of just gave your background, but for the person that's this is the first time hearing you, can you give them, kind of a nutshell of what got you interested in this topic to begin with?
That's a good one. I mean, I can go all the way back to even when I guess I was in high school or junior high school and being interested. And I vaguely remember going to a conference in Kansas City and passing Alan Hynek. Just, I had no idea who he was, and I was a nobody. I grew up in Indonesia. My parents had an experience when we were over there back in the late 50s that I didn't even find out about until years later. But somewhere between that and in my college years and especially by the last year of college when I took a really interesting course in parapsychology and led to other things, got me to read up a lot about Hal Puthoff and always been impressed with him and met my friend Tommy Bland and then after that it just things seemed to snowball and somewhere along the way through other friends, through Tom especially, I got to know Alan Hynek and for a little while before he passed away, I did some things with the Center for UFO Studies and sent a few reports in. But for the most part, it seems to be a lot of people. It's kind of independent interests and trying to step carefully and not make the wrong step and try to follow the leads where they go. And that seems to be a lot. That's actually what originated this entire paper, was just I wrote a list of questions I began to have on my own and just started following those. And that ended up with this, and then I sent it to you, and here we are.
Yeah, yeah.
It wasn't the plan. I promise you, it wasn't the plan.
Well,
But
you do raise some interesting questions. We'll go over them tonight, whether there'll be answers out there or not. We also are going to have call-ins, during the second hour. So if people have read the PDF, it's actually right now, if you go on podcastufo.com, it's if people are watching the show there, which the YouTube is embedded there, you'll see the PDF down below. It's 22 pages long, and a lot of really good points. What has your feedback been like? You've passed it around a little bit.
Well, as you know, a month ago, about at the end of October, I had come up with the first, I guess it was about 19 pages or a little bit less at the time, and it was just a rough draft. And even at this point, it's not something I wrote with a purpose to publish or whatnot. It was a rough draft, and I sent it to you and about a handful of others, Joe Murgia and David Beatty, and basically just said, hey, if I've got something wrong, tell me, that sort of thing. Give me any feedback. And I got some nice response from Dave on it. I understand there's a point I'll make here in a minute that you brought up earlier. And not much else. People were nice enough, but I guess if it's a draft, I did send it to Tyler Rogaway. And just because the point was the people who have put things out there that helped me, I would felt at least, I can oblige to give them a heads up on it and send it to them and let them take a look at it. But for the most part, didn't get a lot of feedback. There were some questions that I had, and Dave Beatty was helpful that way, and Tim McMillan, who worked with him, were helpful that way. But then it was the question you raised that really got me thinking. And it was some of my interests began to revolve around the question of Douglas Kurth and what he saw and what Dave Fravor saw and why the two the descriptions seemed to vary a good bit. And then when you wrote me back and said, how do we know what Douglas Kurth saw is what Dave Fravor saw? And for some reason that hit me. I just realized right then, we're all presuming that what we're being told is the way it is. And wow, that set me off on a whole different path of looking up facts. I spent a long time. I wrote to the pilots, asking questions about which aircraft, who flew what. Did a lot of research, went all the way back, found some of the early things that Kevin Day had written, and even all the way back to where the original FLIR video had been posted in 2007. And not many people are aware that a little later in that post, there's a what it basically seems like a page or so out of a log file that describes the pilots that went out. It's an event summary. And that began to, and especially even in the executive summary, if you look at the times, I began to realize, wait a minute, Douglas Kurth was out an hour and a half or 2 hours before David Fravor claims he launched. Fravor is known for saying all the time they left between 12 and 1, somewhere in that time frame. And even his wingman, or the pilot Alex Dietrich, has stated that they left sometime noon or after. But even in the executive summary where it talks about Douglas Kurth's outing, he was out there initially doing a post-flight maintenance or post-maintenance flight check, something to that effect, which struck me because that's not what David Fravor initially says. They were doing an air defense exercises, a 2v2, two planes fighting against two others. But then I compare that with the article that was written by Paco Chierici in 2015. It seemed to be the main source where a lot of this got started, and maybe even where Robert Powell got started. And even he says that Douglas Kurth was doing a post-maintenance flight check. But they both seem to suggest that Kurth went out there, saw this 300-foot disturbance in the water, 150 to 100 meters. But then they told him to skip it. And you're like, but he was already right there, and he actually says he flew right over it. Then he says he saw Fravor coming in, and Fravor claims he saw this cross-shaped thing under the water. But if you'll remember in the original paper, I pretty well stopped there because it was Douglas Kurth saying he looked back and saw the disturbance had disappeared. But it didn't disappear in Fravor's story until after Fravor had his encounter. So there was a conflict right there. How could it be gone unless Douglas Kurth was right on top of it the whole time? Now I don't think even that's the case, because I think Kurth must have been out there earlier, perhaps by himself originally, because his flight number, and in the PDF, I go into all of this. And even at the very end, there's a photograph that I found showing Kurth's plane with his flight number, with a plane number on it and his name printed. But that's not one of the two flights that supposedly went out when Fravor went out. So the whole paper began just these conflicts that didn't add up. And one of the points, since you mentioned it earlier, that I guess I want to say up front, just to kind of head everybody off at the pass, is the comment's been made, that reading the paper, it's hard to know where I'm going. But that wasn't why I started writing it. It was just pure analysis. I was just hitting a domino and following it where it went. So I understand that if you're looking for me to reach a point and tell you a given conclusion, this is what the fact is, well, read it in the sections and understand the questions, because my aim is to get a lot more questions raised. And in fact, I have a quote, I found this even this morning, that says, "We don't know the answers, but we have plenty of evidence to support the questions." And that's a quote from Harry Reid when he originally came out and admitted that he had backed the ATIP project. And that's kind of my point. The point is, there's things that don't add up. And there are questions I hope we have good answers. I mean, I want to have faith, and the paper starts with the idea that, we all are hopeful for what To the Stars wants and what they profess to be about and what they're claiming they're going to do. But frankly, I know somebody's going to ask me what I think, and this whole thing is looking a lot more like an op to me. Like there's something else going on, because we're getting a narrative with Fravor's one story, and there are aspects of even things Kevin Day wrote back in 2010 that don't match Fravor's story, or even Kurth's story. That seemed like a completely third encounter with somebody engaging an object up at 20,000 feet that shot right down into the water. And when the pilot flew away, it shot right back out and went on its merry way. That's practically the quote. And I'm like, so how many encounters were there? Yeah. And it's just not adding up. I mean, things are not adding up the way it was. Of course, This started with me was how Kurth ended up at Bigelow Aerospace in 2007, before any other names seemed to have appeared. The pilot who was there starts working at Bigelow Aerospace. And I did reach out to Douglas Kurth, and he was nice enough to reply, but of course he says anything that he had to say has already been published, and good luck.
Oh,
so
wow.
He doesn't want to talk, and which of course is interesting to me as well. But
well, there's two things right off the bat I want to say. First of all, I think Kevin Day is, and I do believe you feel the same way, is totally credible. I also feel David Fravor is credible, but there is a little bit of
I do too.
conflict there. There was obvious at a conference, several months back, and that there's a little bit of conflict of, what one person is speculating over another. Mostly, I want to say David Fravor has, speculated that other people don't know that actually do. For instance, Kevin Day. But I have some questions I'm going to throw at you to get your opinion as we go along here. But if you would, in kind of a nutshell, can you tell us basically what we're going to be covering tonight, besides the Nimitz?
Yeah, sure.
You're touching on a lot of the different things I know we're going to talk about, but
There
just
were basically
in general.
were basically four sections to this paper that I broke it down into. The first one was just questions on this Nimitz narrative, because of the conflicts that even initially I was seeing. Somehow, the two things can't seem to be right, or they seem to have big discrepancies. The second is questions on a Navy, I think the way I worded it was a Navy investigation behind OSAP and ATIP, because I think there's undeniable indications, especially because, and I've documented it, some things Eric has said, some things Paco Chierici has now said, that there was an O&I investigation that went on. And in fact, the person who originally wrote the executive summary, the classified version or the original investigation, was a GS-15 with O&I. But if this was long before OSAP and ATIP came out, then and that was actually one of the things that started in the set of questions I wrote to myself, and it's in the beginning of the paper, is you look at these things and it's hard not to think that the Navy is some kind of a silent backer or a silent player in all of this, because it allowed Elizondo to take the videos and resign and immediately go to work To the Stars and use those videos as promotional material. No consequences that we've seen. You've got the Navy changing some of their pilot reporting policies. You've got a lot of these things happening. There's even a comment Hal put out in, I think in his SSE conference, where he says that these Navy pilots were permitted to speak. Well, that's a kind of an unusual way to say it if they're supposed to be retired citizens able to do what they please and feel like speaking. Anyway, the third section was kind of interesting to me as well, me personally, because it was the idea of how did the DeLong situation, which started out with kind of in the WikiLeaks and his meeting the people at Lockheed, end up with him To the Stars? Because there's a gap in there, which there doesn't seem to be a connection. The people he originally was writing out that he first met, and suddenly now he's co-founding To the Stars with Hal Puthoff and Jim Simivan. And so that was more of an intriguing little analysis in there. And I think from what my opinion at this point is that Kit Green played a hand in that, because I don't know how the connection was made there, but the description sounds a lot like him. And then, of course, the final, maybe the shorter section on this was, why a To the Stars after all of that? Why create a To the Stars Academy? If you're going to do a Navy investigation, if you're going to be investigating all of this sort of thing, why do many of the same names, at least, that were in the Bigelow Aerospace, the Bass kind of arrangement, and have carried through all of this? Why? You're right. These are people that I've had a lot of respect for. I've read about for years. I mean, oddly enough, I looked a little bit at Stephen Justice. This is a brilliant guy. I mean, I like his designs. He's visual. It's a heck of a thing to practically retire from all those years at Lockheed the month before you suddenly show up on stage with To the Stars. My impression originally was they've got something. I don't know what, but they've already got something. And now I think probably the Office of the Secretary of Defense is helping them because of some things stated in that CRADA, that Army CRADA that was put out there about some of the materials that they've got. But so it's basically was these four different sections that the questions I had eventually led me to really be focusing on. And it's simply to raise questions, to ask, go out and get the answers that we want. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm not against anybody. I laugh to myself because I may have mentioned this to you. This is like somebody wants you to buy a car, invest money in it. Well, you should ask for the Carfax.
Yeah.
And they should expect you're going to ask for it these days. They should just have it ready, be upfront about it. So when you begin to get the feeling that the stories aren't tying together and things you might want to know, they don't want to talk to you, which sadly, after the end of the first paper, you wrote me the question about To the Stars is not being inclusive of those in the UFO community. And some of the recent comments that came out on Grant Cameron show him talking to Melinda Leslie about Jim Simivan saying, nope, don't want to talk to you, not interested. Okay, it's their company, but they're looking for people to invest money. And they're certainly going on the talk show circuits and going out to the conferences and talking to the UFO community and wanting input through their Vault app that they're going to be making. So it seems to me, a little more upfront with some of the information and explaining some of these conflicts. I would like to just have explanations to put my own mind at ease.
Right.
Hopefully that everything's okay and everything's on the up and up.
Yeah. Yeah, we can all hope for that. I had thought that Tom DeLonge's sister, who was the publicist for TTSA, I was thinking that she, perhaps maybe she had not had a background in this type of thing, and I researched her. I think it's Carrie, maybe, I believe.
I think that sounds right.
But she has a background in doing what she's doing. So because I've been kind of surprised that there hasn't been a lot of connectivity when someone like myself or someone that has a really good show or that tries to keep on the up and up contacts them. They're generally not replying. But they use we can be used as a tool when needed. That's kind of how it feels in some ways. I'm not sure.
That was something I read the other day and I wish I could remember who it was, because it's important to me to give credit to all these other people who've done all this good work that has helped all of us keep on top of things. But the comment was something to the effect that, David Fravor only talks to George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell, and somebody else only talks, Jim Simivan only talks to Melinda Leslie and whomever. And it's like, you're right. You want to get them on your show, and only specific audiences are they seemingly willing to talk to. I mean, as I said, I reached out to a couple of the pilots that I could find, and generally they were nice, but not talkative, not wanting to answer questions. Fravor seems to be willing to say just about everything, but most of the others are pretty tight-lipped or don't want to say anything or don't want to talk at all. And I would think if you're really trying to promote this why not have Kurth on the show with Fravor? You'd think here's a guy who went to work at Bigelow Aerospace, would be a huge proponent to back all of this information up, could explain his involvement. But I don't know. For some reason, it seems to be very tailored, the way the narrative is going. And that's my concern. I don't really know why. It bothers me when somebody won't tell you things that you want to know. And if I get it wrong, I reached out and tried to ask questions and wanted to, send them stuff to see what they have to say. I'm not saying I'm going to get everything right, but I don't think I can be held totally accountable if I've made some errors or some mistakes, because these are just questions that I think people should ask. But I think everybody should be looking at them because something doesn't add up. Well,
the thing that you kind of uncovered, or I actually have, I believe I've seen it before, or maybe I follow what you wrote, but is it Paco? Is that how you say his name?
I think it's Paco. I think Paco Chirichi.
Paco
right?
Chirichi.
That's my pronunciation. Yeah. Paco.
Yeah. He was given a classified document and was able to use it to write his article, and they had to turn it back. To me, that seems like the biggest question of them all, to me.
Well, and that's why it's the first big type lead at the top of this thing, because that stunned me. Back in October, when I was doing all of this research, and this was in the first paper that I sent to you and Dave Beatty and Todd Arugaway and Joe Murgia and Danny Silva and a few of those, that I laughed when I told you. I said it's one of the advantages of being able to sit here all day and just look for things. That I happened to come across another podcast by another guy. I guess it was a fighter pilot podcast, Alpha Personnel, whatever personalities. And he had Paco Chirichi on there. And they spent the longest time talking about all this cool stuff, pilot stuff.
Yeah.
I've always been impressed. It amazes me. These pilots are a bunch of tall, good-looking guys.
And they're
Definitely
just amazing.
fighter pilot material.
Yeah, and they're amazing.
But
You know what, Chris? I'm sorry I got you led you into this question, and we have to go into a break. So we're going to pick it up right here when we come back. So this is Martin Willis with Chris Lambright, and we'll be right back right after these messages.
We're clear, Martin. Just over 3 minutes in this break.
3 minutes. Okay. So we'll pick it up right there when we come back, Chris. And so for right now, we've got 3 minutes on YouTube only, and so we'll bring up something else. Can you go over basically your book X Descending for those who may not be aware of it?
yeah, and it'll be a nice kind of a little aside thing, because if people really do wonder why I cared to dig into all of this, a lot of it, me personally, did stem from that episode of Unidentified, where they talked about the Kirtland Air Force Base incidents, which was clearly the Paul Bennewitz story, but never mentioned his name or anything. And the point was, I knew a little bit about that. And Paul Bennewitz, of course, the whole issue was he was a man that had a successful company and lived in the nice part of Albuquerque, and had an interest in things that were going on up in the northern New Mexico Dulce area. This is back in the mid 79 or to late 1979. And at some point, long story short, was on the roof of his house and happened to see some things coming and taken off from out of the Manzano weapons storage area. So he had some good camera equipment, Hasselblad camera, another one mounted on a telescope. And over a period of several nights from his roof, he got film and still shots of these objects that would zip down the mountain, go lights out. And one time, the mountain down lights out in 5 seconds. So these are very, very fast objects. And even at one point, his wife was out there, and he said, "Get ready, here they go." And they took off and shot down around the end of the mountains. He had all this on film. And somewhere in around January, I guess, when he got the film developed or whatnot, is when he finally picked up the phone and called down to the base at Kirtland and got in touch with Ernest Edwards, who then put him in touch with Richard Doty. So for anybody who wonders, this is where Richard Doty's name came into all of this, is because he happened to be the person on the other end of the phone who talked to Paul Bennewitz. But what started it all was these films. It wasn't picking up signals from the base, which is the whole story that they tried to sell. Okay.
No, we have 1 minute.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, to wrap it up. Yeah.
Anyway, so the idea, sorry, I apologize. The idea is Paul saw some things, and here's also one point to be made. Why 40 years later almost would they still be trying to push the issue of, no, there was nothing to it, it was just Russians, it was whatever else? Doty would be out there. I've had that question asked. It's a fair question. Why still keep piling on to try to keep the story buried? And I didn't appreciate the way it was presented in that episode of Unidentified and the way they tried to demean Paul. It's all clear. I wrote a little section at the end of this paper for anyone who wants to know, why it mattered to me. That'll fill in that kind of information. And Anyway, so that's the book X Descending, which actually covers 2 films. The ones Paul took and some amazing, incredible films that Ray took. Both of them tied back into the Air Force Research Lab. So the book is about those films.
Excellent. Race, we're ready to go back in? Well, it's over 3 minutes. Race, you there? We're ready to go live.
I'm here, my brother. Stand by, and I'll count you down.
All right.
I was over here on another computer getting everything sorted for the phone calls. I had a phone call already come in.
Oh, geez. I got to get ready for that over here, too.
Oh, good.
Here, let me... Oops. Stack. Got to get this signed in now so that I'm ready. Okay, I'm in. Okay. And we've got bumper rolling, and if you're ready, my brother, I'll go ahead and get us going.
Yeah, we're ready.
In 5, 4, 3, 2...
All right, welcome back. This is Martin Willis, and I have Chris Lambright. We're here on Podcast UFO. Chris, I made a note of where we ended, and I looked down. I can't read. I wrote it with my left hand. I can't read my own writing. So we were basically talking about. I think you were mentioning a pilot, or
yeah, it was Paco's comments that he made at the tail end of this other podcast, in which, at that point, the host of the other podcast said, "Okay, I have to ask you about the article, the 2015 article, the X-Files edition. Terrific article. If anybody hasn't read it, go find that." Mm-hmm. And he brought it up, and Paco began talking about it, and that's when he says he talked to Fravor, and when he called him to ask about writing it, and Fravor said, "What a coincidence! They just left my house, and they're doing this investigation." And Paco says he got a copy of this. I believe the way he worded it was exhaustive classified report. And he said they interviewed everybody.
And it was a year-long report, right?
I don't know how long the report was, but it was several pages. I mean, I think 15, 20 pages long. But I do remember him explicitly stating it was an exhaustive classified report where they talked to the pilots, the radar operators, the submarine. I'm like, whoa. And that's when he says, yeah, and I had it for 2 weeks before I wrote my report, and then I had to give it back. And I had never heard that. I'm like, wait a minute now. There's clear evidence that somebody has done some kind of investigation that was a classified one that he got to. And of course, I did add it at the very last of the other day. He's now actually come out on another podcast and just addressed this whole thing, talking about how I think Dave Beatty, after I wrote him and sent him the paper in October, wrote me and asked me about that. And he said he's going to with Paco. And that's when apparently Paco wrote him back and said, yeah, he doesn't want to tell him where he got the report, but ask Fravor. And subsequently, Paco has come out and said it was an O&I investigation. Although now he kind of says, well, now I'm thinking maybe it was an ATIP investigation. But ATIP ended in 2013, from what we've been told.
2017, right?
Well, this is 2015. Excuse me, I'm sorry. 2015 is when he wrote his article. In March of 2015, mm-hmm. Which in fact was obviously even a few months, so to speak, before Tom DeLonge supposedly had gone to Lockheed and before anybody had even heard of To the Stars or anything along that line. But it struck me as odd that, wait, if somebody is willing to loan him a copy of this exhaustive report for 2 weeks to help him, I guess, write his article, although he says in this most recent interview, a few days back, I guess, that he said through a circuitous route, he got his hands or got a copy of that article that he looked at, but that it was an O&I investigation. Although now maybe he thinks it was ATIP, but I'm like, he said O&I. Eric Davis had apparently mentioned to Linda Howell that the early report that the executive summary was drawn from was done by an O&I investigator. It was a GS-15. So there was clearly some time, and in fact, if you go and look at the reports from all the way back to the newspaper articles, even Fravor has stated that he got a call from his friend Douglas Cheeks Kurth, who's the other pilot who was working at Bigelow Aerospace, that somewhere in the 2008 or so time frame, somebody else was already wanting to do an investigation. A weird way to put it, he said, we have a customer who wants to investigate this. Can we do it? I'm like, who is the customer? We don't really know. But that's when I began to realize clearly there's been an investigation going on that the two different sources have stated it was an O&I investigation. But according to what I've heard through Linda's show and Eric and whoever stating that the executive summary was facilitated, I think the way Linda put it, facilitated by this manager at the DIA to get it to Eric and Hal for them to analyze or to look at because it had been classified. So clearly there's a classified version, a classified report. The executive summary is kind of the declassified, sanitized version, but somebody's loaning it to Paco Chierici for him to write his article, which suggests to me somebody wants this publicized or somebody is willing to have the information out there. And one of the things that I noted and that I believe was somewhere in this information, this article is, that's when you first heard about Douglas Kurth's role was, first I heard, was in Paco's article, where he described having been out there and seen the big, huge circular shape in the water. He doesn't quote Kurth. So if you look at it that way, it's pretty clear from what I can tell, he must have gotten the information somewhere, probably in that ONI investigation that he got. And even though the names are blacked out, it's clear that it's Kurth's, description, even in the executive summary. But it doesn't fit with the outing, as far as I can tell, when Fravor says he was out there and Kurth said, oh, he saw them coming in, and then he turned around and they called him off, said skip it. And Fravor makes it out that, which I believe him, right, that their new aircraft he was in has a larger fuel capacity than Kurth, so they wanted him to go out instead of Kurth. But Kurth's already there, and he described seeing it. So why would? And you don't ever hear about. My first thought was, where was Kurth's wingman if Fravor said they were going to do this air defense exercise? But Kurth never mentions having had a wingman. I'm thinking, and his plane later on wasn't the one. So there's conflicts in here. There's conflicts even down to the naval investigation end of it, Office of Naval Intelligence, whoever was doing the investigation. That doesn't hold up. And my thinking now is something was going on from 2007, which is where Hal said this got started in June, very specific month, June of 2007. Then Douglas Kurth ends up at Bigelow Aerospace. There was a comment, I haven't been able to document where I saw this yet, a comment that I think was attributed to Jacques Vallée, that he supposedly had done the database for Bass, and it was then handed over to a pilot, which is kind of an unusual way to put it, if my memory is correct, which made me wonder if that wasn't Douglas Kurth for some reason there. But the other thing about this that strikes me as really strange, which may also tie into Elizondo having been with the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, not for acquisition and sustainment or acquisition and technology, but for intelligence. Of course, he was at the top of all of this all along. And for some reason, when the money for the Harry Reid OSAP contract, all we've known of that came out of that money, seemed to be a pretty extensive effort to gather other information. I think it's pretty clear that's where the money came to buy into MUFON's database. Hal went out and had those 38 DARDs written. So for some reason, there was a real effort to gather more information about the UFO phenomenon in general from any available sources they could get, which struck me as you would think, as most of us who've been at this a while think, okay, somebody up there has all the data. Well, then why would you need to go out and get into a public database, a public UFO group's database? Why would you be going out? And so I'm not sure how I don't really have a clear mindset on how that works yet, but it's obvious that a lot of what was going on over the last number of years had to do with going out and gathering extra information from other sources, not like somebody already had that. And I don't know, I don't know whether, I don't know, but at the same time, if an investigation had been done by ONI, who was Fravor talking to in early 2015 when Paco called him up and Fravor says, yeah, they were just here? Who was doing that investigation? And why has Fravor alluded? That was a big question a lot of people have had. Why has Fravor made it sound like nobody talked to him until 2017? He even said in one of the programs that one of the other pilots called him up and said, hey, have you been talked to yet? No. Well, I said, I've been talked to by like the Pentagon 5 times. And Fravor said, give him my number and I'll talk to him. But somebody was at Fravor's house in 2015.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just there are a lot of these questions that don't seem to add up.
One of the things I just want to make a point, a little side note here, and that is that if a lot of people have speculated that the Tic Tacs were some type of, Air Force or some other type of, project, secret project, and they were just testing to see how the Navy would react to it, that type of thing. A lot of people have been speculating that, but why would they have an exhaustive year-long, investigation if that was the case? I mean, everyone would be in on it or know about it, at that level, at the upper levels that would initiate an investigation like this. So I'm just kind of making that point.
Well, it's a thought actually that I was talking to someone about this morning, which started with this idea of why would somebody be talking to Fravor in 2015? And why would Elizondo need to be going and interviewing everybody in 2017 if they'd already done this investigation back, if ATIP was onto it way back? But then the thought occurred to me, it almost sounds like somebody's trying to retrace the steps and recreate the appearance of doing this investigation for ATIP. But at the same time, it occurred to me, if you were going to test your equipment and make a point to somebody, it wouldn't be bad to test it around your own strike group because you know there's not going to be anybody else around there. And apparently they make sure these guys don't have live ammo. And if you can fly around out there and your special radar seems to be able to pick them up, although some other really interesting articles, I give a lot of credit to Tyler Rogoway and The Drive and Tim McMillan. They write some good articles on special projects and the new radar technologies and whatnot. And this whole idea that there's, I think it was called Nemesis, some type of ability to shoot drones out that would like fake the presence of Navy carriers and other things out there.
Right.
But if you had something like this Tic Tac and you tested it out there and you showed whoever, the dog and pony show to your senators or whomever, that you've got this stuff nobody has, maybe one of the first things you'd want to do is make sure it looked like you didn't have it, that you didn't know what it was. You might play it up as UFOs, and now you're desperately looking for metamaterials, and you're trying to reverse engineer it so that any of the other countries' intelligence agents, anybody who was looking at it, would be just as confused as you described. Why would we be doing all of this if we already had this stuff? So I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying it's a perfect theory, but it did occur to me the possibility that what we're now trying to do is to make sure it looks like we don't have it. So nobody's focusing their attention on us. All the spies in the world aren't suddenly trying to saturate, over here looking for the information. But I don't know. It's a tough call when you think of some of the, and I agree, David Fravor is a very convincing, just like Kevin Day. I mean, when I looked at Kevin Day's first one, it's just like you can't doubt that something happened out there, that whatever it was had a real serious impact on these guys. Yeah. I don't know what the rest of the story is, but something was out there. I just don't know whose it was.
Right. Another question I've asked on this show before, but I haven't asked you what you thought about it, is why do you suppose some people had to sign an NDA and some people did not? Like Fravor, for instance. I mean, why would, being a first-hand witness like that? I know he was debriefed, right afterwards, but I mean, no NDA?
Yeah, that's a tough call. Now, I do think, of course, keep in mind, people being told not to talk is pretty standard fare in this thing going way back. We always hear about, not Men in Black, but people being told, you didn't see anything, that's the right answer. Why the pilots, from what we're told, were not told or never told not to talk, I don't know whether that's because maybe if it was something we were testing, you would know with the advent of the internet and with the SIPRNets and with people emailing things. Even I think Alex Dietrich, the co-pilot of Fravor's wingman, had made a statement that when she got back, she wrote some notes and sent it off, mailed it to her aunt at home saying, hold on to this, it's some real X-Files shit, So maybe you just realize at some point these days you're never going to keep it all quiet. Why they would tell the radar technicians, that's a good one. And at the same time, in all fairness, I made the comment, and I mentioned it to you before, some of the descriptions of the planes that went out, Fravor's encounter, Kurth being out there an hour, how can Kevin Day not know that? How can they not know where these planes were? And then if you were going to investigate Fravor, why wouldn't you also talk to Kevin Day? He was the main radar man on duty at the time. Yeah. But in all fairness, it occurred to me, unless you've already got the radar data, which you can use to recreate everything that would have been seen on the radar systems of the ships. So you might not need to go back and talk to the technicians anymore because you've got all of that somewhere. I mean, I don't have a real answer for that. I mean, that's speculation. But I don't know whether, and keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier to you, I think Hal Puthoff in his SSE conference stated that these Navy pilots were permitted to talk about this. I have no real good explanation, but my gut feeling right now from everything that I've looked at with this paper seems to suggest there's a narrative that they were willing to use, and they wanted to use the Nimitz case. And why have 15 different encounters or 3 different encounters out there if you can just narrow it down to the one instance which Fravor was involved in, tell him he can talk about anything he wants, but this is the narrative. Kurth was out there right before you. We called him off, and I don't even know why they would mention Kurth if he was at Bigelow Aerospace, except that Paco mentioned him in that 2015 article. So Kurth's name was already out there. But maybe they at some point wanted the pilots to speak or didn't want. Yeah, I don't know. It's curious because when the executive summary was Eric Davis, apparently, according to what I heard Linda Howe say on one of her shows, had said that the original report was not put on Navy and DOD stationery, specifically, I think, to keep it from being classified. But then later on, the DIA classified it. Why would you not want it classified, or was that an effort to keep it out of the hands of people who would classify it, right? You can just leave it in your drawer. You can take it with you where you want. Don't have to answer questions. Maybe not having the pilots talk about it, or maybe they were told not to talk. But maybe somebody went back later and said, okay, we're going to do this thing now. Now you can talk about it. You just can't tell us. I can guess all day long. What if they were told, don't speak about it?
You mean
Now
initially?
they come back to initially.
Yeah.
Or they were told, don't discuss this. But now somebody comes back and says, all right, we're going to give you, as Hal said, permitted to speak about it now.
Well,
I don't know. I don't have a real good answer there.
You sent me a link to Paco actually being interviewed, and Chirichi, is that how you say his last name?
I think so.
Something
Chirichi.
like that. Yeah. So he's being interviewed, and he said that he was talking about David, talking with David in a bar several years ago, previous to 2015, when he heard that story first. So to me, that sounds like David was able to talk about it whenever he wanted to.
That's exactly, valid point. If he was willing to talk, and David Fravor has made the comment, they'd sit around the bar and talk about the strangest things they've seen, and he said, I chased a UFO. And I agree. That's a conflict. Why would the text be told not to speak of it? Except, I don't know, except this. The texts were apparently told not to speak about it by whoever came on board their ships and confiscated the data. I've not heard of anybody coming on board to Fravor in his paraloft, the ready room, and going in there and saying, hand over the tapes and don't speak about it. So perhaps it's only the people who happen to be in a position to have encountered those, whoever they were, that flew in and said, give us all the data, and took it away. Maybe they were told that by whoever flew in to take the data, but you couldn't go and talk to everybody and the pilots and everybody else on every single ship, especially if there was no reason for you to go there. So it wasn't to my understanding, it wasn't the captains of the boats, it wasn't the Admiralty, the Navy, contacting everybody and saying, don't talk. It sounds to me like it was just the people who came into the presence of these guys who supposedly flew in and wanted to confiscate the tapes and the drives and all of that, who say they were told and had signed non-disclosure agreements. Maybe it's just Fravor doesn't hang out with those guys, and maybe he was not in a location where the men who came in on the planes were. But you're right. It's another question that I don't understand. I don't have an answer for.
Yeah. Another part of what you touch on quite a bit actually is, why the Navy. It is kind of interesting to me. The Navy, not other branches, but there's some type of connection there, and also with TTSA as well. You're right. That's one of the very, very first things the questions I had was, why is the Navy one of the prime players? The witnesses are all from the Navy. The ships were out there. That was all Navy. The Navy seems to be doing the investigation. The Navy changes their reporting things publicly, comes out and says, okay, wasn't the Air Force. And forever, people have generally considered if it's UFOs, the Air Force is in charge. And I don't know whether, just speculating here, but what if it was the people who came in and took all the radar tapes, who picked all this stuff up, were part of the old Bastion Air Force or whomever, who had the authority to come in and demand those tapes. And the Navy didn't like it. The Navy's got pilots out there that are encountering these things, and their new radar systems and that they've got can detect these objects, and everybody's seeing these things, and then suddenly realize now we know these things are here, and we've been standing behind whoever's been calling the shots on this before. I don't know. It's curious that in the TV episode,
Even Christopher Mellon makes the comment, we're not trying to do an end run around our government. Interesting thought to bring up, if you're doing some kind of run. But yeah, I mean, and I've had plenty of people, and as well as I do in the history of this phenomenon, sightings out in the ocean, things coming in and going out of the ocean, Navy experiences. Some of those are the most amazing ones, for the simple fact that even in the case of the Nimitz episode, people talk about why would we be testing things 100 miles off the coast instead of just doing it at Area 51 where it's all safe? Why would you risk flying something way out there? And if it's flying around out there, it's probably not it's not drug runners or something that far out there over the middle of a Navy carrier strike group. But the Navy's been at this for a long time, even back when, well, you don't need me to explain that. But yeah, that comes up quite a bit. People wonder, why is the Navy now seem to be behind this? There was a comment from the lady, I think it was in some of the requests that people were sending in for information on ATIP and who's in charge. And a lady, Susan Groff, I think was her name, at the Office of the Secretary of Defense, they had apparently been getting feedback from the Air Force as well. And the Office of Secretary of Defense finally said, look, we're going to be the point man on this. So if you have any information you need to clear, send it to them, which maybe that's to stop some of the contention between the Air Force and the Navy over who's saying what. But once again, it was OSD involvement at that point, which is kind of where Elizondo got into all of this, which was another thing I think I fairly well decided, that Elizondo was way up there, not just some guy at the Pentagon. I actually did a search for the National Program Special Management Staff, which is on his, when he signed his resignation, that he was the director of National Program Special Management Staff. There's practically nothing on them, at least available on the internet. I found one entry, but it has to do with a high-level group of people who are involved with these special access programs. And looking into that is what pretty well convinced me that I have a feeling Elizondo was a part of this way up at the top when whatever started in 2007 was first getting designated as a special access program, or at least something that required his input on it. But it's kind of the whole idea of ATIP and OSAP, and if ATIP was just a nickname, that special access programs often get nicknames, so maybe that. But then Hal comes out and says, but OSAP was just one. I mean, I don't have the quote right in front of me, but in his SSE conference paper or report, he mentions that that this was just one program. That when the money ran out of it, it wasn't just the end of everything. Doesn't mean that funding was all the funding there was for whatever other programs there were. So once again, it's a lot of questions, but things just don't seem to be adding up, and I don't know what that spells. What does it spell out? I mean, does it mean that it's a bunch of, I mean, I'd laugh when I think of the analogy people talk about, the Wizard of Oz, and don't look at the man behind the curtain, as though there's something Machiavellian going on. But if you remember the story, the guy behind the curtain was a good guy. And in the Wizard of Oz, he was an okay guy in the long run. It was just the way it was being done that makes people suspicious. And that may be the case here. But I don't know, just when you're not getting the full story and things seem to, even at this point, it's not holding together perfectly well. Because if you look closely at it, you can get all of these discrepancies. But, but even going down to the idea of the Tic Tac, having smooth, no features, and in the recent interview with, I think it was Paco Chiaricci's interview, where he's going back over the 09 investigation, and he does, unfortunately, kind of convey some of the same attitude towards some of the other witnesses, that no, none of that happened. It wasn't, but then again, what about the story of Fravor having claimed that he saw these two extensions, the little antenna or the little tiny feet?
Right, yeah.
That he saw that was close up, and even in the SCU report, it's got a sketch in there with two little extensions on them, but I don't think there's any attribution for where the sketch came from. In Fravor's interview with Jeremy Corbell, he's very clear about it, that you could see it clear as day. And one of the other witnesses, I apologize, I can't remember his name right now, who's mentioned standing back from one of the screens, and I guess somewhere on one of the ships, and seeing it very, very clearly. Maybe that's why why would they be more clear on that? And why are our videos so fuzzy when they talk about what they saw, and they it's an interesting set of circumstances.
Right. Well, we're right at our break at 55. So thank you so much for listening, everyone. I'm on with Christian Lambright, and we'll be right back right after these messages. All right, welcome back. My guest tonight is Chris Lambright, and we were talking before the break basically about Lou Elizondo and kind of a mystery guy. I mean, I did get the pleasure to meet him a year and a half ago or so in New Jersey at a MUFON conference, and we talked in the lobby for like a half hour and never even talked about UFOs, things that he collects and things like that. That's kind of what we're talking about. But seems like a real straightforward guy, very intelligent, nice person to speak with and all that. But he's a little bit of a mystery too. In general, with certainly the feedback I've been getting from listeners, it's there's a lot of people speculating about him. What are your thoughts in general about Lou? And before we go on, I do want to mention this one other thing. I remember you telling me you were in the room when Bill Moore came out and said that he was basically, working for, was it the CIA? What was Bill?
Well, he was, you must be referring to the conference in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
When Bill Moore came out and pretty well bared his soul about having been working with, I guess it was AFOSI or whomever. I have my own opinions after all the work I did looking at the book when it came to situations like this where certain things just didn't add up. Trying to get a chronology and how can this happen when that happened. But yeah, there were a lot of us there. Actually, I think I was sitting right next to Linda Howe at the time, and it was like, holy cow. And of course, it was a big revelation to me. I remember at the time when Bill stood up there and said, it all began 10 years ago with a man named Paul Benowitz. And I was like, hallelujah. So there you go. Whatever it was originated that far back. And that's where Bill kind of got involved with it and met Richard Doty and some of that kind of stuff. But Lou Elizondo, I do not know personally. He's, in a way I judge a lot based on a person's face and their demeanor and the way they come across. And he strikes me as a straight up guy. And part of me also says unless you're able to work with people and do the job, you don't rise up into the levels that he was, at least at the office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. And of course, and I think other people have asked him, well, you were supposed to be in counterintelligence. Why should we trust you now? And I guess in a way you assume that. I guess at my age, you kind of learn to just trust everybody but cut the cards. Beyond that, I thought it was interesting when he supposedly had resigned and went to work with To the Stars, where he said he had to leave or quit what he was doing to continue the mission. Once again, that's an intriguing kind of a way to word it. He didn't just say just quit these guys and go do something else. So it always makes you wonder, is the mission still ongoing, and what was the mission to begin with? And originally, until I began to looking at these kind of questions, as far as anybody knew, the story was he was a guy at the Pentagon directing the ATIP program. And at least my impression had been, maybe it was everyone's, that the money that came from ATIP and OSAP was used to basically cover the costs of Lou directing the ATIP program at the Pentagon. And that's the way it seemed to me it was presented in the original newspaper articles. So it was a little bit kind of an unusual thing when his resignation letter turns up and doesn't say DIA or wherever. It doesn't, of course, I think John Alexander once before us said, people say the Pentagon and you forget this is like a small city. It's a huge place. You can't just say Pentagon and it's one cohesive bunch.
Right.
So in this particular case, and for all I know, Lou may have had an office in the Pentagon for sure. So that could be okay. That way. But it's when you realize that he's resigning, and of course I wonder, does everybody who resigns just send a letter to Mattis and say, I'm out, and that's your resignation? Isn't there a little more standard protocol for how people in the military resign than just that? So I don't know whether he just moved his office to the stars and continued. But when I began to realize, okay, well, what exactly is the National Program Special Management Staff that he's the director of? And I did some work, and you can find some things online. There's a place I found that had a curriculum posted for some kind of university, gives people who are coming into these positions backgrounds and special access programs and special access program oversight committee, and then the senior review group. And you realize, like some people have said, that with these kinds of programs, sometimes most of your money is just spent on keeping the secret, on the security of it, not actually doing whatever the work was.
It's kind of irony.
Huh? So it's like you get 22 million and only 1 million goes to the program because the other 20 is built to keep this thing secret. I mean, I'm laughing about that. I'm not saying that's true, but the general idea being that it began to occur to me that, you know what, a guy who's that high up in the area where the security aspects of sensitive programs are handled, and you're the director of this special management staff, I don't know what the normal management staff might be, began to really make me think. And so a comment he made in an interview just recently with George Knapp on George Knapp's new kind of a website blog thing, where Elizondo says, in the 10 years I was with the program, or I worked the program, and that struck me, wait, I thought he got into it somewhere around 2010 when he took it over ATIP, and he ran it until 2013 when the money ran out. So if he was resigned in 2017 and he was in it 10 years, that puts him back to 2007, which again seems to jive with what Hal had indicated with Kirsch showing up. It makes me think somebody started some kind of a project or program way back in 2007. Whatever it was, my feeling probably is where the ONI investigation was started. Or somebody may have been doing it before then and decided they needed a special access program. Somehow that involved the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Somehow Lou Elizondo, it wasn't just some guy that they knocked on his door and said, oh, guess what? You're about to hear everything there is about UFOs, and we want you to send this stuff. And he had no clue before that. Something tells me he was way up somewhere. That's just my feelings at this point. But it's hard for me. I don't know. I guess it's the episode of Unidentified, where they actually had the segment about the fifth episode, where it was segments of objects flying over nuclear weapons areas, the one that involved Kirtland and all of this, that I began to think, and I watched that thing 5 times and made notes, and just to be sure I had it this much right, that they would have all these episodes, these 2 segments with special effects showing objects coming over in the directions of nuclear facilities. They had Rendlesham, they had recreations, they had the witnesses, named them. And then they put the one on that they have Richard Doty and Craig Bishop basically throw Paul under the bus. Never mention him by name. No CGIs, no comments. And then a few minutes later, you have Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon saying that, it's actually illegal to do an operation against your own citizenry. And if we were told to do that, I wouldn't do it because, I look at their faces and I believe them. But did they not know that a minute before, 2 minutes before in the same episode, they're going to have a guy on there talking about how they screwed over Paul Binowitz, basically pushed him over the edge and convincing him, oh, keep quiet and all this. Exactly the opposite, which, even Tim McMillan wrote me today, is that basically that's exactly the illegality that they were talking about, that it's illegal to do a minute later in the program. That's a conflict. I have a hard time with that.
That must
morality-wise.
That must be in the cutting room,
I suppose. But once again, who picked that? Who edited that? Honestly made me think somebody has to have some kind of editorial control to choose the episodes to put in there and then edit that one segment specifically the way they did. And to say you didn't know, I mean, you and I both know there's been all sorts of talk recently about Richard Doty having worked with Hal Puthoff, and everybody knows Doty's background. Why would you put him on a program like that, knowing his background, talking about something that had no threats against nuclear weapons areas, the exact opposite of what the other 2 segments were about? And maybe they didn't know. I mean, I get it. Tom DeLonge is supposed to be in charge of the entertainment end. But whoever was deciding to edit that program that way, who stands up for Paul? Who, if it was illegal, what was done to him?
Hmm.
So I don't know. But anyway, but even
Yeah.
then, I'm not pointing a finger at anybody. But
Yeah.
back to Elizondo, at this stage, my impression is this is a well-qualified guy who's done this a long time, and the position he had at the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, that's way up there, I think. That's not just a newbie sitting
Yeah.
at the Pentagon calling UFO reports, that sort of thing.
You made
So I think he had to.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, you made an interesting point just a minute ago. You said if he actually did resign. You said something like that. I mean, is there is there a speculation out there that he may still be part of that in this?
Maybe it's just me, but I mean, you notice in his resignation letter there, in some place I read that it said something that sounded like he had deferred his retirement. Now, I'm not sure, and I will say from my own experience when I was working on my book, there's an entire summary section at the end that relates to Richard Doty and John Lear and some operations going on in Laos. And back in the days of the Vietnam War, what you find out was Nixon says we're not supposed to have anybody over there in Vietnam, so they do what's called sheep dipping. They take the army guys, supposedly kick them out, get them out of the army. They're now working for Raytheon, and now they're on top of this mountain in Laos running the radar systems that are controlling the flights that runs over Hanoi. But they technically are working for Raytheon, right? So Nixon can say, we don't have any military guys in Laos. So it's really a clever ploy. And I'm not suggesting that that's necessarily what Elizondo is doing, but the idea that if you resign from your position, does that mean he actually quit the military completely? Or is he still, I don't know. I don't want to go there and make it sound like there's some big conspiracy thing going, but it is a curious thing, because if he just resigned his director position at the National Program Management Staff, and you'll notice that everybody who went suddenly to work for To the Stars seems to have resigned or retired immediately if they weren't already retired. But Stephen Justice, the month before, boom, he retires and goes to work for To the Stars. Elizondo retires or resigns, poof, goes to work for To the Stars. Got a lot of people who were supposedly, and it's a point that I kind of make in my paper, when you'll notice even some of the people that Tom DeLonge was referring to as the general or the CIA man, that a lot of those people, and turns out, they had retired years before. In fact, McCaslin, who was the Air Force Research Lab general, one of the first few people that Tom DeLonge, and his name came out in the Podesta emails, the WikiLeaks, that Neil McCaslin,
right,
clearly a high-ranking guy, is supposedly one of those that I think Rob Weiss of Lockheed kind of made the connections that got Tom DeLonge into Neil McCaslin. And he calls him the general, and then there was General Carey, who was with the Space Command. But these guys had both retired 2 or 3 years before. So why would you be connecting him now with retired people? So I don't know whether that's just, I don't know. I'm not sure how to make that out. But if you wanted to get in good with people inside the government now, you'd think you wouldn't go to guys who were retired 2 years ago.
Mm.
But it seems to me all of them are now taking roles in industry, representing companies that have contracts back with the same agencies or the same departments that they used to work with. Of course, that's not an uncommon thing. You hear that a lot, that people resign from some position in the military and immediately become a consultant or go to work for a company that they used to have contracts with. And it may not be a bad thing. I mean, I don't, so far at this point, some of the things that DeLonge had wanted to do, if you read the WikiLeaks emails and some of the things that McCaslin has suggested, STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, those are all good things. And there's a valid point in some of the material, some of the things that I wrote, that suggested there are a lot of people, even at Lockheed, back in 2015, I think it was, there was a huge, substantial number of the people that were about to retire. And you can see the brain drain suddenly. If you have a whole lot of people who are working with you suddenly retiring, you need to fill those seats and bring in people. And like DeLonge even made the comment, that something to the effect of, a lot of new kids coming out of school today, they want to work for Google or Amazon. They don't want to go to work for some secret Area 51 place where you can't talk about anything that you do and your life becomes shuttered. So how do you get those good brains to come in? And it's a valid point. It's a valid point. So, but I don't know. It just, at this point, I don't know what there's some tie to the Office of Secretary of Defense behind a lot of this, behind the To the Stars CRADA arrangement. And that to me is, if you read the statement, it's clear that if To the Stars is a public or private company doing their own thing, getting materials from Linda Howe or wherever they're accessing metamaterials and crashed things out there somewhere, and they're going to work an arrangement with the Army, which just sounded like a valid, justifiable thing. The Army's got the facilities and the people. We'll provide the stuff and we'll share the science. But then why is the OSD a second partner? And that they're the ones who can seemingly, and it seemingly is only in there to reinforce the Army, that the OSD can provide some kind of information on the origination of the materials now in the possession of To the Stars. So there's some connection back in here, some tie-in still with a government agency or the OSD, whomever else, which directly or indirectly was kind of where Lou Elizondo used to work. And I think was actually the same area that Christopher Mellon had been in back when he was in politics, those years ago. Mm-hmm. But I don't, I'm just asking questions that I would like answers for.
Yeah.
And honestly, if they want people to invest money, fine. If I can put my mind at ease, I might buy some stock as well, right? At least go to the shareholder meetings and ask a few questions there. But it's
speaking of that. There it is, a confusing part of TTSA. A lot of people are saying, I don't understand, their entertainment and what is their drive to make money. And then on the other hand, Alejandro will say, something, well, they got to fund, the work they're doing. There's people that are doing serious work. So what are your thoughts on the different segments of TTSA? I think there's 3 separate components to it.
Well, one of the points that I mentioned was I can certainly understand producing a television series that touches on this thing, the Project Blue Book television series, although a lot of it's kind of fictionalized, but it's interesting. People watch it. I was reading an article earlier that showed the ratings for Ancient Aliens and the over 40 crowd. And I'm like, yes. So everybody, I don't care what anybody says, Martin, everybody's interested in UFOs just because of the possibilities. So as far as having an entertainment side and doing a program on unidentified, which may talk to real people, there's money to be made. Certainly, it's going to be the easiest way to make money initially if you can get the program going. Getting contracts behind the scenes, trying to get people to invest. Of course, I don't know what the inner workings or the background things that they're doing. If you looked at some of the people that are on their board, they're paying to hire a new person, paying them $65,000 a year to do something. So I guess they've got money from somewhere. And from what I understand or have been read or seen, Tom DeLonge invested a big chunk of change at the beginning, and they're obliged to repay that at some point. So I can certainly understand, though, at this stage, if you're these people who've got a lot of inside connections, just like those generals who retire and immediately go work as a consultant for another military industrial place that used to have contracts with them back at they're going to know people. If you pick up the phone, people will answer. So I really don't have, it's their company. It's their company. And if, at the end of the day, they're entitled to do what they want and get the funding that they can. And, you wish them well. Maybe someday we'll all be flying around in a Tic Tac if they reverse engineer one of them, and that would be great. I mean, I'm not going to complain. But at the same time, I guess the impression people got when they first appeared on stage, and at least many of us, and I think maybe mistakenly those of us out here who've had an interest in this for a long time, saw this as some type of disclosure or revelation. They're coming out here and they're going to validate interest in this phenomenon. And you really wouldn't anticipate that they might suddenly turn around and become another part of the military-industrial complex and get contracts back with the Army or else that they can't talk about. It's like the Navy coming out and saying they're going to have their pilots be much more open about reporting unidentified vehicles or unidentified aircraft, but they're not going to be open to telling us. I guess if you send an FOI request, you might still get nothing. But I don't know. So that's really the part that I think I wrote the least amount on, which is the STARS Academy. What was the goal? Although, again, I'll even say this from an experience I had last week. The whole idea of the bureaucracy, and Elizondo even claiming that, getting involved in the bureaucracy, and I get it. When you can't tell people what you're working on, which is how you need to support the budget that you've got by explaining how important your work is, but you can't tell them because it's a classified project or special access, it's tough to keep the budget money coming, and the bureaucracy tends to want to bury you. Pick up the phone and try to call a congressman and just say, I'd like to ask a question about this, and the little girl who answers the phone says, well, do you represent a group? And you're like, no, I'm just a civilian out here, but I'd like to ask some questions of, well, we have a lot of the people on the phone click. And you realize, just the simple bureaucracy of getting through the girl who's answering the phone and is just answering them right and left. And first question is, do you represent a group? Which that tells you right there, if you represent a huge group, you have a far better chance of getting some kind of a hearing or an audience, or at least getting through. So the simple bureaucracy of can't even reach your congressman these days makes me think I can certainly understand perhaps some of Lou Elizondo's position that, boy, trying to bring up UFOs to anybody on the inside, but you can't tell them what the deal is because it's a special project or it's, hush hush. Yeah. And your budget's getting cut right and left. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
One of the things I want to mention is because the timeline on this whole thing, everyone brings up over and over about the December 16th, 2017 New York Times article. Once that was released, it kind of changed everything and the videos and all that. But if you recall, it was back in October when Tom DeLonge had that live stream where he basically, came out with about everything that came out in the New York Times article.
Yeah, exactly.
And it just took the New York Times to propel this thing into motion, but they initiated it, back then.
Well, and that's kind of a curious thing too, because you're right. When it came out in October, if I'm not mistaken, there's Lou Elizondo sitting on stage with all the rest of them. And I remember thinking, these are some heavy-hitting, high-intellect people sitting behind Tom DeLonge, so how to figure that out. But nobody really made huge connections, if I recall, at that moment to Lou Elizondo and what his position was and how he ended up there, even though Christopher Mellon was talking about the Nimitz incidents even then. But then when the New York Times article comes out, and you realize it really was more of a marketing play, I think, than an expose. Because most of the time, newspapers, they want to be the first one on that story before anybody else knows. But in this particular case, I think it was the New York Times and the Washington Post, and who was the other one that came out maybe the next day? But they all seemed to come out with a similar story within a day or so of each other, or maybe on the same day, which sounded to me like somebody was making sure this story was being planted in these locations so that it would all be released at the same time, a big publicity thing. And of course, at the time, it was making the most out of Lou Elizondo and publicizing the ATIP Harry Reid contract, which, I guess that's, a month or two later, you have another huge media push and you keep everything hot and turning over in the news. It was well done. They sure got the publicity out of it.
That's right.
And I think a lot of people wonder now after the last episodes of Unidentified, things seem to be kind of quiet at the moment, I guess, except for the Army Crata that was released not too long ago.
Yeah.
So what's going to be the next? How do you keep your products hot?
Right.
How do you keep your publicity going?
I
don't know.
We're going to be taking calls, Chris, and one's actually coming in now. It's going to be screened. So hopefully, yep, it's being screened right now. But, there's I do want to talk, after the caller about one of the things that I was thinking about is the unidentified. Whose pitch was that? And did they approach TTSA, or was it the other way around? All right, I'm going to take this call now. Hang on just a second. We have another one coming in too. And for over on KGRA, that number is 855-472-5483. And right now we have Stephen calling from Washington. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Hi, guys. It's a great show. It's a really interesting show. I wanted to add a question to your list of questions, and that is, the whole event, the whole Nimitz event, the fact that they, can you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah, we're set.
Sure.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So they're out there, and Kevin Day said that they had been tracking that thing on radar for several days, that they had gotten it several times, and they finally retasked some jets to go have a look, and the jets got video footage of the UFOs. And the thing you want to add a really good question to your list of questions is, so they wouldn't have gotten on the phone to the Pentagon right away and said, there's something that can fly circles around us out here? And I mean, it seems like they would have got retasked at that moment to investigate further. And that part of the story is really fishy to me, that didn't immediately stop and go back to Washington, and a lot of things clicked. But all these people that I hear, Kevin Day and all the people, the witnesses for Nimitz, I never hear any of them mention, we got retasked, we were set to look at it further, or anything like that. And I was wondering if you could just comment on that.
Thanks, Stephen. Go ahead.
That's exactly the kind of observation that, of course, led me eventually to all these questions that I had, because it came up in a conversation I was having the other day that even if whoever it was that flew in, as I think the term has been, that were COD'd or coded in, the guys that flew in on the plane and supposedly confiscated all the data, how'd they hear about it? Did somebody on the ships call the Pentagon or call back to somewhere and say, hey, we have some strange things happening? Or was all of this being monitored over the secure intranet or internet communications? So somebody had to find out about it to be flown out there to the ships. But that's, and Kevin Day has made the point that for the most part, when he was first picking these things up on radar, they were staying out of the way of the carrier group. They didn't seem to show any interest in them, and they were just passing by slowly from the distances. And it wasn't an important thing until they really began to do the flights, the air defense exercises. So, I'd have to defer to those guys who've done this all their lives and have been out there to know exactly how things end up. Do you immediately tell the captain, or is it your job to look out for it and then you pass it on up when you can? But I agree. At some point, if I was the captain of this ship and I'd been getting these strange things, and especially if somebody actually had seen one, I agree with the caller. Why would who would you call?
Right. And not only they had radar data and video footage at that point. So it's not like they would have had to call Washington empty-handed and say, what should we do? There's something flying circles around us. What should we do? I've got, radar data and film. And that part of the story to me has just always been a real problem, a real disconnect.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, Kevin Day has made the point, I think in a comment he stated somewhere, that after I guess we're talking the Fravor incident, that all those pilots were flying around and on their own tasking, they were going after these objects. And you'd think after that first one, everybody turns their camera on. I think even Paco Chierici mentioned it in his article. You turn the camera on immediately. You just leave the camera on when you take off, so you're filming whatever you're filming. there is something that, it goes to the idea of why wouldn't, like the caller was saying, why wouldn't you immediately call back to somebody, the Joint Chiefs or anybody, and say, what is going on? We've got these objects flying around all over the place. My first thought was you would immediately have them shift some satellites straight over you, looking right down at the carrier strike group, and you'd see all of this. You would think they'd have some of that capability in an immediate scenario. This is the odd thing, though, and I didn't really go into this in my paper, but the point that Kevin Day says after the object zipped away, the radar or the ship told him, "Hey, Captain, it's sitting at your cap point." Yeah. And of course, a lot of people have wondered, how would it know where his cap point was? In the last interview with Paco Chierici, he's talking about the FLIR video that was shot by, I believe it was Chad Underwood, the flight that went out after Fravor did. And he makes the comment that this thing was sitting at his cap point. And so as they're flying towards the cap point straight at it, with their AT FLIR, they're videoing this thing. And I'm like, I don't know where he got that. That stated, and it wasn't in his previous articles, that the FLIR video we're seeing was something sitting at the cap point. But I'll make the comment, too, that if you look at the speed of the plane, and I did just a little research on this, so I don't claim to be an expert, but the speed that these F-18s or F-A-18s fly, they land at around, I think it was 150 knots, so not super fast when you're landing. But the FLIR video shows the plane going at right at about 250 knots, straight at whatever this thing is that it's supposedly filming. But that's not very fast.
No, it's not.
And if you're trying to chase down an object that you've got in both video mode and infrared mode, and in one case it's in video mode on 1 power magnification, I'm thinking, couldn't you see the thing? But why would you be just, calmly flying along at 250 knots if you're supposedly chasing a tic-tac, something you've never seen before? I would think you'd kick in afterburners and you would try to catch up to it as fast as you could. So wow. I don't know. Yeah. It's another question. And what the caller's points are well made, that there's some explanations that we should be getting that I can't seem to make them add up.
Thanks for the call, Stephen.
Yeah. All right,
thanks, Stephen.
All right, thank you. We have another caller. Might as well take that now. We have Andy calling from Connecticut. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Hi, guys. My question for Chris is, having not read his paper at this point, I'll just listen to the show. But is he essentially saying that he's calling into question, the facts of the Tic Tac Nimitz incident, and that it's perhaps an orchestrated effort on the Navy's behalf to slowly spoon feed the UFO information to the public, and that combined with TTSA's efforts, that this isn't just one huge orchestrated undertaking on behalf of the Department of Defense to just slowly introduce the public to the idea of the extraterrestrial presence. And good show as always, guys. I'll take your answer off there. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Bye-bye.
I knew somebody was going to ask me what I think. And I still would say, because I've talked to my friends, that at this stage, I'm still strongly leaning towards the Nimitz incident, the Tic Tac incident, Fravor seeing this thing, Kevin Day, all of these things these guys saw, that there was actually some type of Tic Tac object out there. If only because you look at their faces when they're talking about it, you look at the way they talk, especially Kevin Day, who's a good writer. If anybody hasn't read his story this year, it's an intriguing story. And you can tell. I mean, this changed something in his attitude, and no doubt Fravor's as well. So I do think, at least I would say my opinion as of I think the Tic Tac incident that Fravor describes occurred. I tend to think there was a lot more out there. There may be any number. I mean, so far, I think Fravor's describing an encounter. I have a feeling Kurth had an encounter that may have been very substantial, one of his own, the big, huge 300-foot wide thing. Then again, and I don't know how to explain this, and maybe Kevin Day can, his 2010 description of an encounter, and it's very odd because he stipulates that it was a captain, now an admiral. That's a good one. So in 2010, he's stipulating, that's not Fravor, as far as I know, or Kurth, who was lieutenant colonel, I believe. But he describes this incident where the pilot encountered this thing at 20,000 feet or so, and the object shot down into the water, and the pilot flew down and followed it down. And then when the pilot flew off, it came back up. So I'm like, well, so there's a third one. And if these things were going on over a 2-week period, maybe there is more than just this one. But for the purposes that, whatever that purpose is, it's best to just encapsulate it and have one cohesive incident that they can provide Fravor talking about, and not have everybody scattering around looking at multitudes of other incidents. I don't know. I think it's the idea that, like Martin, like you asked, why the Navy? And the response that seems to have come out, especially if you have an O&I investigation of this thing, suggests maybe the Navy didn't know. Some of the reactions that you get would suggest that they didn't know. The suddenly looking, having Hal asking for 38 or so other papers to be written on what the future is going to be in 2050, our science, suggests a real interest in catching up to speed on whatever technology or science you might be aware of, which almost sounds like the Navy was shaken a little bit by what they encountered out there. But then again, I can certainly see, the cat point thing, unless if it's some other intelligence, they're monitoring our calls and they know where the cat points are, and so they're going to just sit and wait for our pilots to play cat and mouse. Why would you have objects monitor? How would they know? So right. I don't know. There are aspects of this that I can see that make me think maybe this is something we already have, but now we have to explain how we got it. And it's easier to claim we're going to study metamaterials and reverse engineer, and poof, here's this tic-tac we built. I don't know, because how else do you explain it? What if it really did come from some other intelligence or some other information you gained, and you don't want to tell people, that you got this and you had it for all these years, and have some people starting to dig down on you, covering your tail. I can come up with scenarios. I honestly can. I can play out all sorts of theories of what this is, but I don't think Kevin Day and Fravor and these guys are lying. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a story they've been told to uphold, and they're doing the best they can. And when you get the other parts that don't hold together, nobody answers those questions.
Yeah, we have another caller. Might as well take that now. We have Greg calling from, where's he calling? Pennsylvania. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Place. Hi, thanks. Okay, I have no doubt that your guest has great information, but I got a couple things that are hanging me up. If Lou is that high, which is possible in the Pentagon, why would he be doing his own ops? And if he's still in the government, that would mean like a whole bunch of these other guys in TTSA still are, because that's where they came from. That would be a whole lot of money that DOD is putting out for what exactly? Because there was nothing going on in the UFO world really until they showed up.
Boy, I love these questions. They do make you think. And that's...
Oh, and I can probably also answer one of your questions after you do that.
Okay. I mean, those are very good questions. In other words, we don't know. I mean, there's a quote that Hal even has in his SSC paper where he says, if I can read this, he says, this $22 million program was one particular program. That does not say that there were not other programs with other funding levels. It isn't like suddenly there was this one program that did not last long and did not have that much money and it shut down. So maybe the OSAP 22 million was put out there to just box up the whole 22 million ATIP. That's where Elizondo came from. This little package over here. If there was something going on, which I tend to think there was, that began maybe in 2007 or earlier, and all of this seems to have coalesced into this, to the stars coming out. And of course, there's articles that have been written about the Navy scientist who's now got these patents that are out there, and the patent office first didn't buy it.
Yeah, I'm not
then
sure
some higher level Navy.
Patents.
Yeah, I don't either, except that some higher level Navy person contacts the patent office and says, we need this patent because something about the Chinese are already doing it. So I don't know whether this is an effort to control, companies by other companies to get their patents, so you have some control. I don't really know. I don't know. There are a lot of these disparate things. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The Chinese don't do anything that we didn't or the Russians didn't do first, and then they kind of riff off of that. But one of the things you were wondering about is how does this information get to the top? I've been in a sort of similar-ish situation. It's on a submarine, go to sleep, wake up after we had seen or heard, we were in sonar, something really unusual in the water. And it got people's attention. It was very unusual. And when I woke up the next morning, there were 5 extra people on board the frigging submarine. That's a good trick. So
do you want to offer us your best guess for how 5 people show up on the submarine?
Yeah.
Apparently, while I was asleep, it surfaced, and I don't know how they got there so damn quick, because it was not long. I mean, it was like less than a day, and we were not near particularly friendly places. I guess you could have flown out there in a couple hours. But
I'm thinking Hunt for Red October, they fly out in a helicopter and drop the guys.
Exactly.
But see, your point is a valid point.
Helicopter.
But you're making the valid point that you hear something unusual, and some people were able to get there. So they obviously got the call, or the information got off the submarine to somebody who got out there quickly.
Right, and they spent a few days there, and they were pretty impressed with it. So, I mean, somebody up at the top level puts in the call. It's not something that the people in the lower level are going to even know happened unless they're directly involved in it.
So would you think somebody at top level would be perhaps monitoring the communications or monitoring some kind of traffic, and they pick up on it?
Yes.
So, that could very well explain some of what Kevin Day and the others are referring to. Somebody is listening in or watching for this kind of thing. Maybe there's a code word when... Go ahead.
The one thing I found odd about Kevin Day was, at least when I was in, the surface sonar techs, if you were high up, you would literally just be doing administration things. So I found it odd that he was doing all this work. Although listening to him a few times, I believe that he was supervising it. And as far as Fravor is concerned, I just think that Fravor's world revolves around Fravor. I think he's being totally honest, but that's just his take on it.
Mm-hmm. I get that.
That's why he's in the center.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense to me.
I'll just leave it there. Let you guys have it. No, but you're right. I mean, and there's the thing. I mean, I think they're both being very honest, which, if nothing else, they're definitely good witnesses.
I wasn't sure at first, but I'm totally buying it at this stage. Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Hey, thanks for the call, Greg.
All right. Bye.
Bye. All right. So that line is open. Anyone can call in, and that's 855-472-5483. So you just, Chris, you just spoke about, I did read that in your paper about the report where someone talks about this thing actually becoming a USO, actually going into the water. Who was that exactly that wrote that?
Yeah, it blows my mind too. Okay. I'm 99% certain that's Kevin Day, because the username was The Seer, and it's meant to be C or SEE apostrophe R, which was the title of the short story that he wrote in his Sailors Anthology. And he had gone, I believe, correct me, it's in the paper, it was either on the Above Top Secret forum, I think it was Above Top Secret, may have been Open Mind, but anyway, in 2010 he had actually gone in and was putting out a little bit of information about his story, and was talking about how his story was a fictionalized account, but based on the facts from the Nimitz case. And but then he also goes and gives this description of this incident, in which this is the one where he says it was a pilot, he was a captain, now an admiral. I've done some looking, but I haven't found one guy like this yet. I'm guessing you would go from captain to being a rear admiral first, I think.
Yeah.
But he says a captain, now an admiral, who had this encounter. And the odd thing is, he uses the same phrase he's used when he's talking about Fravor, where he says he hears the guy saying, I'm engaged, oh my God, which he's reiterated that same thing accordingly going to Fravor. But then his description is the pilot encountered this thing, and I say 20,000 feet, that's just my memory, but the point was it was at altitude. It wasn't 50 feet off the surface. He encounters some object up at this altitude, and the object shoots down, and the pilot follows it, and the object goes into the water. Clear, stipulates into the water. Then as the pilot flies away, the object shot back out of the water, right back to altitude, and went on its merry way. I think he used that term in Unidentified as well. But it clearly sounds like another encounter of somebody seeing something and the object goes down towards the water, whatever that is. But it's not Fravor's encounter, and it's certainly not Kurth's, what little we know about whatever encounter Kurth had.
Wow.
So I think, honestly, that's a question that Kevin Day, I would like to ask. It may be a mistake, but once again, that was only 5 years after the incidents. Here we are now, 17 years or so after, how many years afterwards. You'd think memories would be clear, much more clear, in 2010 if he's describing something that he remembered and that it was so visual to him that he had actually used some of this in this story. So I don't know. It just, when I looked at that, I thought, this sounds like maybe a third incident.
But this is not
clearly it's in the water.
This is not in his book, right? You're not saying that this is actually in his fictionalized book.
No, I don't believe so. No,
okay.
He wrote a book called The Sailors Anthology.
Yeah,
and this I think was all he's publicized this for quite a while. That after he got out of the military, if I'm not mistaken, he wrote this book called The Sailors Anthology, and it has some short stories, and one of them is called The Seer. Yeah. And I read it. Impressive. It's a heck of an imaginative, creative kind of story with a lot of, some touching on remote viewing and this sort of thing. Probably would have made a good movie. But then again, I don't know. He seems to have been the only person who, on his own initiative, has been making some effort to bring out, to make it known some of the Nimitz encounters that occurred. I mean, frankly, I've wondered if he wasn't the guy back in 2007 who first put the FLIR video out there. Maybe he was the guy who had this information. I don't know. No one knows who that was. But in 2010, he recited this story. You can go find it. I think you can still find it if you go back on the Open Minds Forum stuff. I've got a link to it, and I'll get the links corrected. But it's an intriguing story, and it goes to making me think if these things were out there, and Carrier Group was out there for at least a couple of weeks or more, if they had a number of these things flying around, and at that point these pilots are on their own initiative chasing down, the objects.
Yeah.
Maybe there really was more than, maybe that's why it's such a big deal now, that there was more than just one incident of a pilot or someone encountering a Tic Tac or whatever that had something to do with going under the water. And maybe that's why we're picking up if you look at some of the reports, you catch traces of people talking about things being tracked underwater. I don't know what the accuracy of that is, but it seems to be some indication of vehicles going into the water.
Right.
Which is also one of the Navy patents, if I'm not mistaken, that came out in the news recently.
Yeah, it can move freely into the water just like anywhere else.
Yeah.
We only have 5 minutes left. I can't believe it already. So I'm not going to be taking any more calls at this point. But the one thing we didn't discuss is the films. And there's someone in the chat room that just said something that we can get that question to Kevin Day, no problem at all. The one you have there, but the films being released the way they were, that's another puzzle here, because Lou actually didn't have permission to release them publicly, yet again there doesn't seem to be any repercussion from it.
And I give John Greenwald plenty of credit. I did send him a link. I haven't heard from him, but I give him enough credit for really drilling down on these questions. And my opinion at this particular point is ATIP was just the nickname. ATIP may have been kind of a disposable name that was used, and the way to bring Lou to the world without exposing much backstory may have been to just say he was the director of ATIP. But somewhere along the lines, the people back in the the government information locations didn't get the memo, or somehow their honestly, if you really look at the wording that's been in there, it may be possible, because I made a point in this last version of the paper, that what they're saying and what Lou is saying are both technically correct if you look at it in context. But if he goes to ask for release of these videos, and you'll remember he made the comment to Fravor when Fravor has cited this in his interviews, where he was talking about Lou came to him and said, "We're going to have this newspaper blast. We want you to do it." And he's like, no. And Lou told him, this is what Fravor said, "We have gotten permission to reveal ATIP." And I thought, permission from whom? Somebody obviously must have been up high enough up there that you needed to get the okay to reveal that. So whoever was in charge up top that's giving them permission for these things, is it the Navy? Is it somebody in a special access program, oversight committee? Somebody up there seems to be, they have to get the okay on it. And I have a feeling whoever was letting him get these videos, maybe nobody expected all these letters to come out later, but he's getting the videos and he's going to use them for analysis or whatever. Then he immediately resigns and goes to the stars and uses them. I think somebody up top who had enough clout is making sure nobody goes after him, because he had the okay to use those, and he knew he was going to use them at To the Stars when he resigned and immediately went over to the Stars and showed them on TV. So, and Lou doesn't seem totally, he doesn't say, "Give me a minute, let me make a call, I'll get you to somebody who can verify that he just seems to calmly let it go, as though and you're right, and there's no repercussions. So I think this whole thing was planned, and To the Stars has got somebody behind them who's watching out for them or making sure they've got the budget they need, or whatever the original Navy or program was that led to the Stars. All of this stuff has been okayed, and that's what kind of makes me think some of this looks like an op. Somebody's still running something out here.
Yeah.
But
So that's kind of a cap on this so far. I mean, we've got like a minute left here. So that's basically, you think it's possible that the whole thing is an op? I mean, this is speculation, right?
I think maybe it's sanctioned. Let's put it that way. These guys have wanted to do something like this. They're brilliant people, engineering people. They want to produce something. I think maybe they have, if not an angel investor, they've got an angel on their shoulder up atop, some of this larger group at the Navy or whomever who wants this to finally come out, but they don't want to expose themselves yet. So they're making sure that all the wheels get greased. And if you don't mind mentioning to everybody, just to reiterate, I didn't realize when I copied the PDF of this last paper that it killed all the links. So by tonight, I'll have all the links active again, and the next time we get it up there. So if you go back, you will know I've linked to every single place you can find the information that I had in this paper. I just must apologize. I didn't realize it died.
All right, Chris. Thanks so much. We got to go.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Martin. Have a good night.
All right. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, everyone. So that's it for the show. And also, just to let you know, that PDF is in the show notes, and that will be linked in the show. Also will be linked in YouTube as well. Next week, we have Shane Ryan. He's going to be talking about the Westall UFO incident, 1966 Australian schoolyard encounter. Thanks so much, everyone. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.
We're clear, gentlemen. That's a wrap.